Play the Which Spidey Suits You game at Burger King.
Black Spidey, I choose you. I want a Maserati.
But be prepared to live with your choice.
One of my favorite parts of the Spider-Man mythos is the symbiote, and I'm clearly not alone in that, considering how often it's been adapted into Spider-Man's multimedia, often multiple times over in each medium. From TV to movies to video games, it's been pretty much everywhere. It's even spun off into its own sub-brand with Venom, and the symbiotes being a pretty major part of the Marvel brand these days. This level of popularity is not something many Spider-Man stories get. Some of the best Spider-Man stories are lucky to get a lazy reference, let alone an actual adaptation of the story. So it's safe to say this one's pretty iconic. But what if I told you I think a lot of these adaptations get a key part of the story totally wrong? Now I know that's a bit of an inflammatory thing to say, but hear me out.
Come on, who's your daddy?
You are.
Beat the villains, control them, and make them fight for you. Spider-Man, friend or foe, you won't believe who's on your side. Rated everyone 10 and up.
If I were to ask you to describe the symbiote storyline, you'd probably tell me something along the lines of, Peter encounters an alien that secretly begins bonding itself to him. It presents itself as an alternative and superior costume, and begins to influence his actions. He continues to wear the alien costume as his behavior gets worse and worse, until, after a particularly bad incident, Peter becomes aware of this, removes it, and it goes off and becomes Venom. Now, the exact details may vary depending on the iteration. Of course, you have your outliers like, it's not an alien. It's a cure for cancer Peter and Eddie's fathers made for some reason. But generally outside of the original comics, the description I gave is pretty much how the story goes. And while I enjoy many of these, my big sticking point with them is their portrayal of the symbiote itself. Despite popular belief, it's a character of its own, and its name isn't Venom. Symbiotes don't even really have names, they're vibrational patterns. And it isn't really pronounceable with human vocal cords. Venom is something specifically created by the bond of the symbiote and Eddie Brock, along with the baggage of their relationships with the Wallcrawler. TLDR, its name isn't Venom, so we're calling it the Venom symbiote or just the symbiote for the rest of the video. I also just wanted to make that point because it's a pet peeve of mine when people call it Venom. All of that to say, the Venom symbiote is not evil, it's misunderstood. A point I feel is made clear in the premiere issue of Web of Spider-Man, and this isn't some obscure issue either. Its imagery is used in pretty much every version of the story. Recreations of its events were even used to represent the canon event for the symbiote saga and Across the Spider-Verse. But its popularity makes me ask one question. Did anyone actually read it? It's typically presented as Peter going to the church to remove the suit. He struggles with it until he ultimately breaks free, and the symbiote sulks away to become Venom. But that's not how it goes, like at all. At this point in the story, Peter's already been separated from the symbiote for a bit, having it removed with the help of the Fantastic Four back in Amazing Spider-Man number 258. But through a story told in small parts, we see the symbiote escape their care, and eventually make its way back to Peter, hiding in his closet waiting to strike. When he goes to grab his costume, it jumps out and attempts to rebond with him. Peter fights with it while traversing the city, constantly talking about how awful it is and how it's a monster. But because of all of this, he ends up in a fight with a group of Vulturions. Look, I already go on enough tangents in this video, Google it, until he ultimately ends up at the church bell. He forces the last Vulturion to leave before he attempts to force the suit off. And unlike most iterations, this nearly kills him. But after being forced off, locked away, and now forced off again, the symbiote goes to sulk away, but we learn that it's learned something in its time with Peter. The narration tells us, on its homeworld, the symbiote is an emotionless being who preys on emotionless others. However, fate has paired it with an emotional being who feels intensely fear, greed, excitement, responsibility, love, but symbiosis is a two-way street. The alien costume is intelligent, it has learned to feel. And in feeling, to act. In a very short while, Peter Parker will awaken and wonder, why did it save him? It's a question that will haunt him for the rest of his life. It's made clear this alien isn't evil, and in fact has learned to be a hero from its time with Peter, as despite all the things Peter claims about it throughout this issue, it proves him wrong in the end by saving his life. It only gets kinda evil when its own resentment for Peter is bonded with Eddie Brock's hatred for Spider-Man. It's kinda the whole reason for the name. But even then, later on, the symbiote and Eddie have a face turn, and a lot of the content of the symbiote's time with Peter and future stories set during that period do a great job of setting that up. In the 2018 annual, the one for the Spencer run, we're shown the whole reason it was taking joyrides in his body at night was an attempt to help Peter, picking up the slack while he sleeps, not realizing it was causing him harm. It's not evil, it was LARPing.
LARP, live action role play. We dress up as our heroes, then finish our Mazes and Mutants game in the sewers.
Cool. Sounds like fun. Sounds like stupid. Count me out.
All that to say, I think most adaptations completely mischaracterize the alien. Once again, it's misunderstood, not evil. I think making it evil not only limits the alien's character and gives you a less nuanced view of it, but I also think it tends to make Peter less interesting as a character. Something I don't think most are aware of regarding this storyline is the symbiote doesn't make him angry or act out. The only influence it has over Peter's actions are when he's asleep. Otherwise it just makes him tired because it's been running around LARPing in his sleep. The whole "it's altering his personality" thing was an invention of the 90s animated series. While I don't think this specific series does it, I think this alteration is often used as a crutch. A lot of iterations tend to tone down or outright get rid of parts of Peter's character, in what I assume is an effort to make him more palatable to general audiences, coming at the cost of his temper and often forgetting Peter Parker is a flawed character in the process, or he's flawed for the origin and only the origin. Because deep personal change definitely happens overnight. This has become so common, I've seen people criticize comic Peter for being a bit of an ass, and I can't help but say, that's the point? I'm gonna go on a bit of a tangent here, but bear with me. I think people's tendency to critique versions of Peter for his morals is often misguided. Many will point to selfish things a version may do and label it a poor adaptation, but I feel that line of thinking is missing the point. Peter's story is very much about growing up. He's forced to grow from a selfish child into a responsible adult, shown through not only his superhero struggles, but his personal struggles much more familiar to you and I. But like I said, this change doesn't happen overnight. Those flaws very much play into who he is. What is shockingly not well known about the character is that he's a hothead. Now, while he's typically a nice guy, mostly just a smartass, if you make him mad, boy can he get mad. Screaming and shouting, throwing punches, sometimes having full-blown rage fits. This also often translates into his superhero work, sometimes in good ways, when it goes hand in hand with his superhuman perseverance, and other times in bad ways. For example, especially early on, Peter could be a bit of a sore loser. An instance of this can be seen in issue 193, in which Peter loses a battle to the Human Fly, and on top of all that, he's slapped by Ned Leeds over a misunderstanding. This enrages Peter, and he goes out and picks apart any and every criminal he can find, with the express purpose of finding the Human Fly and taking his anger out on him. Though an informant in a bar Spidey interrogates tips the police off to this, and they get to the Fly first, further enraging Peter. With his revenge plot stolen from him, he's left to just scream into the void about it. But by the time of Amazing Spider-Man number 296 and 297, we see how Peter's grown from that. At this point in time, one of those fits of rage had actually mentally scarred Doc Ock, being quite literally paralyzed with fear at just the sight of Spider-Man. This becomes a problem during the climax of the story. When Spidey arrives at the World Trade Center to stop Otto from unleashing a bioweapon on New York, he learns that the only way to stop it is for Doc Ock to call the pilot and give a code word. But Doc Ock is now paralyzed with fear thanks to your friendly neighborhood so-and-so. Peter then comes to the conclusion that the only way to save the city is to break Otto of this trance by letting himself be beaten. And this works, as with his ego restored, Otto sees no reason for, as he puts it, any bad press, and leaves Peter to suffer this humiliation. And does Peter go on a rampage over it? No. He actually reflects on his history of that kind of behavior, returning home from the battle thinking to himself, "To the rest of the world, I was a loser today. Just a clown in a costume. I should be angry, frustrated, smashing my fist into walls. But I don't feel that way. I did what I had to do. I know that, and somehow that's enough. Well, I'll be. Take yourself a bow, Peter Parker. I think you just became an adult." All of that to say, if you relegate these elements of Peter's character to simply be a gimmick that comes with a cool costume, you lose out on Peter's character growth. He's already perfectly living up to Uncle Ben's example. What story is there to be told? Kinda just makes it boring. Now this version of the symbiote story can be done without hindering or making a gimmick out of those parts of Peter's character. For instance, the originator of it, Spider-Man the Animated Series, does this while also maintaining things like Peter's temper. But I find it's commonly used as a way to not have to actually meaningfully address Peter's flaws, giving a hollow apology and moving on. For example, the recent Marvel Spider-Man 2 adapted the symbiote saga, and after removing the suit, he's very apologetic. And plenty of those scenes are great, but it hardly means anything when, in the same breath, I'm being told he was being mind-controlled by an evil alien. This doesn't work because it's not a reflection on his actual behavior. It just feels like empty words. Whereas in something like what I showed in Amazing Spider-Man number 297, we know Peter is prone to lash out in anger, so it's much more impactful to see him acknowledge that, and to be able to acknowledge the good he did in swallowing his pride, than it is to see him apologize for something he didn't even really do. At the end of the day, I hope we can put this version of the story to rest, at least for a little bit. I don't think it's really doing much to benefit either character, and it's just overdone. It's been used so commonly, as many have said. It would be unique and subversive to use the original at this point. The only thing I can think of that actually does is Midnight Suns, and that's not even a Spider-Man game. So with yet another take of the story being set up at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, I can only hope we get something fresh instead of yet another retread of what we've been getting for 30 years.